Morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. It is 9:08, I do believe. Al, do you want to do a roll call?
That happens then. I didn't know what.
District 1,
Okay, did you call that number yet? Yep. I did.
District 2. Kathy.
She's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still working on it.
Here.
I'm here.
We have a quorum, guys.
Well, what number did you call?
I called this number right here.
You did all that?
I did all that, yeah.
What are you trying to work
Nothing
on,
come up.
Kathy? You're good now?
Zoom.
No, Zoom. No Zoom.
Okay. Tomorrow, right?
Yeah, they have a meeting tomorrow morning.
Okay, I'll be on. Okay, I got the number now anyhow. Okay. You in the thing?
Yeah, you're.
All right,
Okay.
next up is review and approval of the agenda. Anybody have anything to add anything to it?
Oh, that Native American Community Clinic?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's it? Will you? Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye.
And then there's the updated, from Vanya for the project, the cleanup project for behavioral health dollars. So I got the updated, yeah.
Okay.
And then if I could, do an executive session for ICW, and then there's a personnel item.
Maria, do we have a lot of signature stuff?
Maybe about 4.
Okay, good. All right, we'll get this done too. All right, Kathy, do you have anything Ray, anything to add to the agenda?
Nothing?
Ray?
No, I was just wondering about that deposit payout. The conservation officers asked if we were still doing it, and I think we had put a stop to it. I don't know.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, we put it into it right away. We're into the second week. All right, so, the motion to approve the agenda.
With the additions,
With the additions, UMSI. Motion. Second?
Motion.
Second by
Second.
Ray, all in favor?
aye.
But
Motion carries. Review and approve the meeting minutes. Do we have any? No?
They'll be brought into the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. And the next up is the calendar review. Not much on our calendar. But it's really full of,
Yeah.
Primaries?
huh?
Primaries?
I'm trying to get a meeting set up next week or so with Scott Omelet and those guys on preparing the quarterly finances. So he's gonna send you guys invites on that. So based upon the 20% EBITDA, so he and the
Oh, yeah,
guys at
yeah, I
the
went over that,
yeah. So they're gonna be putting together a plan on that. So.
Other than the treasury money, the CARES Act money, last I heard was May 1st, they're supposed to have something.
Yeah.
Yeah. You hear so much different stuff like that, so.
They're sure dragging their feet on that anyway, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're trying to keep out those,
Lawsuits.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, someone said they were gonna put 4 billion, just pay that out and save 4 billion for that case to get done. That's all you hear so much stuff like that, so. But all right, next up is Veronica. Anything to add to the calendars other than, okay, all right, you Rich, Veronica?
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. And I hope everybody on the phone can hear me. And if not, just let me know to speak up. I'll use my courtroom voice. But otherwise, I have compiled the executive summary following the audits and investigations. These are the audits and investigations that occurred throughout 2019. And the ones that I've highlighted are specifically the Whipley forensic analysis of the Circle of Life Academy, the OGP's investigation into the Central Minnesota Land Company and the Star Lake project, as well as the review of the transfer of behavioral health third-party billing revenue into the tribe's general fund. And so starting with the Whipley forensic analysis of the Circle of Life, that investigation is completed to the extent of our resources. And Whipley completed their analysis consistent with the scope of our request when we engaged them into this. And so at this point, there are a few remaining tasks following the COLA audit. There are some recommendations at the end of the summary that I've provided, basically summarizing what the key findings from Whipley showed. And so there's recommendations that the council can choose to adopt, or in all, some or none. Otherwise, we've also disclosed this information to the BCA and the FBI, as well as the Office of General Counsel for the state of Minnesota. That was forwarded to Keith Ellison's office, and I got a response back. So there's some recommendations also from the attorney who contacted me from his office that did not get put into this recommendation, but I did, or into this report, but I do still have those, and I'm following up on those as well. So we are I'm in the process of scheduling meetings with the individuals from the BCA and the FBI. Following their review, they've had it for a little bit more, over a month. I think I sent it in February to them for their review. So we'll just follow up with them, have a meeting, see if they are potentially pursuing any criminal actions. I think we also need to continue to maintain frequent contact with the Bureau of Indian Education to verify that our Circle of Life Academy remains in good standing. And I know that we have capable staff at the Circle of Life Academy to make sure that we're on the up and up on that. And then the last recommendation, that's a big one in my opinion, is the review of the Circle of Life Academy bylaws with plans to implement them as soon as possible so that we can establish a school board, and it would be consistent with the recommendation. So basically the summary of the findings were that primarily test scores, it looked like test data, the data from the testing, the standardized testing that occurred, looked like that data was manipulated, and probably to the benefit of the school. And so I don't want to go verbatim into the report because I believe that you've all read it. But basically the data, the way that it was presented to different entities was presented in several different color schemes, ranging in 5 color categories, which is what the NWEA was supposed to be. And then the versions that COLA had presented were in 4 color categories and 3 color categories respectively. And so those different data tables, Whipley was able to extrapolate the data from what was being reported, and they were able to come up with the percentages that you see at the bottom of that report, showing sort of the real percentage as to what should have been reported versus what we actually reported from the Circle of Life. And that's for beginning of year reading, beginning of year math, middle of year reading, middle of year math, and end of year reading and end of year math. And so you can sort of see the pretty significant discrepancies between what was reported and what was actual. Also, what Whipley had determined is that there was a lot of not following policies and procedures, specifically with regards to finances, that there was just a lot of, there was not a lot of oversight for how the Circle of Life Academy and that administration at that time was spending their dollars. There's no documentation for things. It was difficult for Whipley even to be able to determine whether or not staff was receiving incentives that were in line with what their contracted obligations said. And so even when COLA did have a school board, it sounded like it was pretty easy to sort of manipulate the school board at that time. There was a lot of interpersonal relationships. I think there was maybe a lot of, or potentially some familial relationships. But basically what Whipley determined is that sort of everybody at every level had the idea that the superintendent basically was just in charge of the school, and then his action should not be questioned. And so I think that ended up getting, I think it muddied a lot of the process and the procedures for that. And so the recommendations from Whipley are that the RBC should develop policies and procedures regarding COLA, making sure that staff is trained in those policies and procedures, and then monitoring the compliance of the policies. And so the recommendations that are in this report are essentially the recommendations from the Whipley report that they provided to the council in 2019, December 2019, up at the Shooting Star Casino. And then with regard to recommendation number 2, that's for developing and implementing management oversight for the COLA, including a COLA school board by revising its bylaws. And I just want to make sure that the council is aware that my office has received a draft of Circle of Life Academy bylaws, both from the division director, Ron Buckanaga, as well as the current superintendent, Jenna Ledbetter. But otherwise, I don't disagree with any of the recommendations that Whipley has made. I think that they are consistent. I think that it helps provide a lot of structure to the COLA, and then make sure that, you know, we're implementing that oversight. And throughout this report, I think that that's basically the theme, is that there wasn't a lot of oversight in all aspects of the audits. And so I do think that that's something that the council should consider is, you know, how do we improve oversight into these various areas, and then making sure that our staff is properly trained to follow that, so that we don't not necessarily micromanage, but that we're abreast of everything that's happening. So I didn't want to go through verbatim the recommendations. I think that they're all reasonable, and I think that, you know, I think that the RBC would be fine in adopting those recommendations, but that's, you know, that's to your discretion. And then my anticipation is to have the meeting with Mr. Newhouse and or Mr. Montgomery from the BCA and FBI respectively, hopefully next week or the week after, just so that we can get that update and, you know, formally close these out if there's not going to be any criminal recommendation or criminal charges stemming from this. And then I think that one can be formally closed out. Are there any questions about the COLA audit? Okay, moving on, the OGP's investigation. This one was very fact intensive, and even the summary of this particular section is still fairly lengthy. But I think that that's because there's just a lot of moving parts to this. Currently, the status is basically, the investigation is basically complete to the extent of our resources. OGP completed their investigation consistent with the scope of our request. At this time, this is also one of the ones that I referred on to the BCA and FBI, and I haven't heard back yet. So this will be lumped in with the other meeting that I am going to be scheduling with them about COLA. We have initiated an insurance claim with our insurance company, and that I believe was initiated in February of 2019, and then they were just provided additional information at the beginning of April of this year. And so I expect that they'll review it, and then they'll be in contact with our people to figure out whether or not there's a claim there that we can make for insurance for this particular investigation. And then also currently, We are in arbitration right now. I believe Mr. Garbo is representing us in that arbitration with Great River Energy, and I think it's also the other company too, the Lake Region Electric Company. And so the last I remember on that is that there was some pretty extensive discovery that Mr. Garbo and the attorneys for the electric companies are probably in the middle of right now. I just don't know the status of the arbitration. And so those are sort of the two follow-up things that we'll have to keep an eye on, is the insurance claim and then the arbitration. And those are the tasks that I've listed underneath the remaining tasks section of the report. And again, my follow-up with the BCA and the FBI is anticipated to be either the week of May 4th or May 11th. But essentially, you know, the OGP's investigation has made a determination that the Star Lake project that was occurring between 2014 and 2018 was basically just kind of a jumbled mess. The report indicates that the tribe hadn't received or hadn't applied for proper permits. We hadn't completed an EIS review. We didn't have all the funding in place. We were relying on funding that was a little bit shaky. We were aligned with someone who was encouraging us to seek funding or seek lending from a potential predatory lender. And even when the tribal attorney at the time had suggested that we do due diligence in checking through that company's background, it seems like that advice was not taken, and the request was still to just push forward with that predatory lender. And so there was just a lot going on, and I think a lot of it had to do with not clear direction and not clear authority. Like who in this project was supposed to be the person managing the project, who was supposed to be the person who was binding the tribe into these agreements, and also who was the point of contact from that project to the council, just to make sure that the council was very much aware of everything that was going on at that time. And it sounded like there's a lot of moving parts, and I think that that's sort of where you'll see in my recommendations that we should be making sure that we have oversight authority, including making sure that large projects such as this, and I don't have the authority to tell the RBC what I think a large project is. I think that that's something that you all can determine for yourselves. But you know, when we have large projects like that, or ones that have a lot of moving parts, that there should be a mechanism by way that project reports to the council, so that the council is making informed decisions on how to steer the project the best. And that's where I was saying that it sounds like there was a lot of putting the cart before the horse. And so it sounded like we were just really pushing forward with the Star Lake project without having that EIS done, without making sure that we had the proper permits in place, our funding sources were secured, things like that. And so that sort of gets into the next recommendation that I have, is that we limit the amount of individuals who would have decision-making authority with those sorts of big projects, that we basically designate 1 or 2 people to be the primary manager of that project, and then they would manage it and continue to report back. And then also if they would have the ability to bind the tribe into agreements and obligations. Because I think that that's part of what this OGP stuff is about too, is that, there's some agreements that we've entered into where I think that, there's potential waivers of sovereign immunity. I think that that's why we're in this arbitration with the electric companies at this point. So, I think had we maybe slowed things down a little bit and sort of really analyzed a lot of the aspects of the project, I think that we wouldn't necessarily be in the same spot we are in today. And I one of the suggestions that I had in terms of sort of doing it this way is that if there's a giant project, then that project can submit a resolution to the council, and the council can, give them signature authority to bind into agreements. But then that can either come to my office for review prior to them binding it, or it could come to the council before that we enter into those agreements. But I think that it gets problematic when individuals, employees, contractors are just signing documents and nobody's really reviewing them before they're signed. And we only sort of get information sort of after the fact. And then also, you know, making sure that the project manager is providing written updates to the RBC, because I think that there's potential that if it's always verbal updates, that is not consistent, that, you know, people, it's like a game of telephone. You can have one person say one thing, and then as it gets further passed down the line, it sort of changes. And so I think having stuff in writing and having concrete things to review is probably the safest way, and it creates a lot more clarity in terms of like where the project is expected to go, what's already completed, those kinds of things. Also, the RBC should be providing clear direction to the project about the RBC's expectations. And that's the RBC as a whole. Because I think that, you know, if there is an RBC official selected by the RBC to spearhead a project, then I think that the project needs to know that information. Because then we don't want to ever get to a point where they're saying, you know, well, this individual RBC official told us that this is how this project should go, but then when it's presented to the RBC as a whole, the rest of the RBC is sort of, you know, stunned a little bit to say like, well, that's not how any of us envisioned the project going. And so if there is, you know, RBC official involvement into a project, then I think that the council sort of needs to approve that. And then the last recommendation that I have is that per the MCT Constitution, all expenditures of reservation funds under control of the RBC must be in accordance with the budget, duly approved by resolution in legal session, and the amounts so expended shall be a matter of public record at all reasonable times. And so I think it's probably best practices to apply that same requirement to just all expenditures of funds that are under our control, whether it's, you know, a state fund, grants, grant from a different tribe, federal funding, that kind of stuff. Because I think ultimately we still have to report those numbers anyways. And so if we just do it the same that we would do it otherwise, then the council is very much aware of exactly what's being spent and where that money is going and why it's being spent that way. And not just for the monies that are in our general fund, but just for our grants and everything else. And so, as I said, the results of the OGP investigation were turned over to the BCA and the FBI. So we'll be following up with them. And then whether or not there's any criminal aspects to that, you know, if there's not, then that we can call formally completed, at least to this side of it. There's still the arbitration going on. And so when that's complete, you know, we'll sort of have an idea. But in terms of the investigation part of it, I think that we're basically complete on that. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, moving on. And so the last section of my report is the audit and review of the transfer of behavioral health third-party billing revenue from behavioral health to the tribe's general fund. And so this was completed by I. Bailey did the forensic accounting of the matter, and then they were not equipped to be able to make a legal determination as to whether or not that was a violation of anything. And so we did refer it on to Attorney Vanya Hogan at Hogan Adams, and she completed her legal review of the matter consistent with the scope of our request. She did submit additional recommendations on March 26th, which are consistent with my recommendations. And so basically what the summary, the remaining tasks for this, there aren't many. I have a remaining task on there that we should determine the status of insurance claim, but that was a copy and paste error, so that's not accurate. So the only remaining task on this would be to follow up with the IHS on how we move forward to address this situation. This was the recommendation that Ms. Hogan had provided in her March 26th recommendation to us. And that would be because the options, I believe at the time, were to either self-disclose, or we could request an advisory opinion from the OIG. But Ms. Hogan ended up coming up with a third option, which I think is reasonable, and I would suggest that we follow it. And that would be to follow up with the IHS on how we move forward to address the situation. Because the the way that I understand it is that the funds that were put into the general fund should have gone to health-related projects. And so we're following up on that. Ms. Hogan has determined, in her opinion, whether or not this was a violation, and that's included in the summary. And then the follow-up, I think, is reasonable, that if we follow up with IHS, that, you know, it could potentially mitigate any consequence that might come from this action that occurred. But this was several years ago. This was from fiscal year 2010 through 2015, and then really it sort of reached its peak in 2016. And so from 2016 to present, you know, I think we've been sort of trying to figure out this issue, but I think we have a pretty clear guidance on how to proceed. So similar to the other recommendations, I think that, you know, there should still always be that oversight, because I think that in terms of the stuff that I've read, I think that there was direction given, and I think that there was times where employees were not following that direction. And so then I think it gets to a situation as to what oversight authority is there, and how do we make sure that we're holding people accountable, especially when they're given clear direction, but they completely disregard that direction. And so my recommendations, that the RBC should designate an individual to reach out to IHS about ways to resolve a possible violation. That individual should provide regular updates to the RBC and the associated directors about the status of resolving the matter. And Ms. Hogan is offered to assist in the follow-up if we need her to. Otherwise, you know, whoever the RBC would designate to do that. And then secondly, you know, I think that we need to make sure that the RBC is verifying that all employees are understanding the scope and limitations of their individual authorities. In this situation, I think it appears that there was a conflict of authorities where our CFO, Scott Omlid, felt that he was in his authority to proceed as he did, and then where former Behavioral Health Director Jerry Jaskin had felt that it was within her authority to manage the funds of the Behavioral Health Director, and to make sure that the funds were being used for health-related purposes. And so when there's a conflict of authorities like that, then, you know, who's the decider for that, and how do employees sort of know that? But otherwise, that audit is basically complete. I think we just need to follow up on how we resolve it with our federal counterparts, because that's really where the money is coming from, is the federal government. But otherwise, you know, my recommendations are based on the information that was available to me at the time that I wrote my summaries. And so I don't anticipate that there's any other information out there that I don't already know, or that hasn't already been discovered. So I think that these are basically nearing finality. I think that we have some other audits maybe that are still in the works, but otherwise I didn't include those in this because they're not near a completed stage at this point. But these ones basically are, and you know, the council has been waiting for a summary from me for a while now on these. So I just wanted to make sure to at least get these ones wrapped up for you all. Were there any questions about the behavioral health portion of the report?
Mr. Chair, I just got two questions. The first question is pertaining to the December meeting, when the auditor had presented the findings, and I know Mr. Ahmed was there, and we had discussed this, and I had asked a series of questions of who had provided him direction to use these funds for unqualified purposes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had stated that it came from the tribal council itself. And so, with that being said, you and I spoke this morning. Mr. Terry Tibbetts had also received some information when this was going on, and I think you had stated that Terry had directed that this activity should not be happening, right?
Correct, yep, that's based off of the information that Ms. Jaskin had provided. She had indicated that Chairman Tibbetts at the time had directed in an email that the money should not be going into the general fund.
Okay. The other question I have is pertaining to, so Ms. Hogan states that in this version here that there's a likely violation of federal law that could jeopardize our participation in the direct billing program. And based upon the activity that had happened there. And so what concerns me is two things. One is what would you say, in your opinion, that you have received cooperation from employees involved in the furtherance of this investigation?
Have I received cooperation?
Current and former employees.
I would say yes.
You've received cooperation to further this investigation?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then, so then the other thing I have is for the entire packet, the question I have is, I've received requests for copies of the individual audits associated with these. What is your recommendation on the status of those individual audits? Asked, Mr. Chair, after I'm done here, I'm going to request 3 motions, but I just kind of want to get this cleared up. So we have an executive summary that I'm going to recommend be released for public release, but the question is going to come forward on the status of those individual audits.
Mm-hmm.
What is your recommendation?
I think that if the council is receiving requests for any component of the individual audits, I would ask that would come to me, because some of those components are tied to employee actions. I know that there have been some employment appeals that have been filed from various parts of these audits. So, if it's something that's employee related, we have to follow our HR handbook, and we can't necessarily release any information about employees. And so, I think that some of this information probably could be released, but I think that we just need to be careful about the scope of that release. So I would be happy to sort of filter those requests as they come in. So if you want to direct them to me, that would be fine. Otherwise, it's tribal property. So, it's up to the tribe in terms of what you want to release or what you want to make public. And I can certainly opine as to what I think should be public and what I think should be kept confidential, but it's ultimately up to you five.
Well, wasn't it passed in August of 2019 that the council has designated you as the authority on this, right? So until that's rescinded, that motion is rescinded, I would be of the opinion that what you stated is 100% accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be fine with me. I'm fine with filtering any requests for any pieces of the audit. As long as they're, not anticipated to be used for any like nefarious purposes or anything like that. But yeah, it should be fine.
And then, Mr. Chair, I got 3 motions here I want to propose to the council.
Second, number 1 is just a motion to approve the executive summary. Motion number 2 is just to direct the executive director and tribal attorney to assess and act on employee conduct. What's a report? Like,
Yeah, so I'll read it back to you so I didn't take a copy of it here. So the first motion, Mr. Chair, that I'm recommending is to approve executive summary recommendations. So the recommendations that she's provided in here.
Yeah.
And for public release, so that the public may have a copy of this executive summary. And as she had stated earlier, if there are individual requests for the individual audits, that they could be filtered through her.
Yeah, because those are things that I feel like the band members should have access to it at what access point.
Yeah.
And we can't just put it on our website, so.
Yeah.
So those are things that, yeah,
Sure.
that's good.
The second one, Mr. Chair, is a motion, and I'll explain this. Motion to direct the executive director and tribal attorney to assess and act on employee conduct in the report with authority granted through the October 4th, 2019 3-signature resolution with regard to cooperation with investigation. So in other words, what I'm saying there is that there are some employees that are current and former that have cooperated with the investigation. And I'm asking the attorney and the executive director to take a look at those individual cases to see if those employees need to be reinstated or if certain employees need reprimand. So based upon the information that they're going to be presenting, and I don't think that needs to be brought to this table. I think that's an internal policy issue.
But I think it's already probably built into our policies already. That
Yeah.
You already had that authority already. I don't think we
Yeah.
need to motion that. I think we just need to motion.
Well, there is a motion that was passed on one of these employees, right? I'm not gonna name names, there was a motion that was passed for one of these employees. And so generally speaking, you probably need RBC action to undo that.
Yeah, I don't have the individual authority to act on any HR. That's not my wheelhouse. I don't have authority to make decisions about HR stuff. But our executive director would, since
That's
she's in charge of her HR stuff.
So basically what I'm saying, what this motion allows for is her to just do what she has to do.
That's your authority to
regardless.
do that.
Yeah. So, the other thing there, the third motion is to direct the executive director and tribal attorney to discuss issues with relevant law enforcement authorities and other agencies as identified in the report.
That shouldn't be in the recommendations. They were, weren't they?
Yes. I mean, well, it's just a status that, we've disclosed it to law enforcement, and then, so if I'm authorized to continue my discussions with law enforcement, then, nothing really changes. We'll just keep getting the updates and stuff, but.
Yeah. So I'm recommending these three motions.
Can't we just do one motion and add all those to it?
All that language?
You got that, Maria?
One motion for all of that.
One motion to approve the executive summary and also to give direction to the executive director and tribal attorney to assess and act on the employee conduct and direct the executive director and tribal attorney to discuss issues relevant to enforcing the law enforcement as it cites in other agencies. So kind of like, if it's been recommended, they take it to the next level, then they have the authority to do it, so.
So basically what I'm saying is I'd like that exact language approved.
So you're already making a motion then for,
I haven't yet, but I'm about to, for that exact language that's as written.
I have a motion for to approve the executive summary with all the, how do you say it?
The exact language of the
The
motion.
exact language is what's
Of the motion.
of the motion with the executive director and the tribal attorney.
Second,
Motion. Are you motioning, Ray?
yeah, motion.
Motion by Ray, second by Alan. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Silent.
Okay, next up, thank you, Brian.
Yes, thank you.
Next up is Scott Amos.
Good morning. So update on PPP loans, the pay period loans that are going out. We I submitted a loan for White Earth Enterprises in the amount of $150,000. They have about 16 employees, and I submitted that, got approval for $150,000 for them. That paperwork should be coming maybe this week or next week. You know, it's a slow process because of so much action going on with the SBA and the banks, but we did get a $150,000 loan for White Earth Enterprises. White Earth Housing also got their PPP loan approved. I am not sure the exact amount, but I think it was quite substantial. So that one will be coming through as well for them, which is good news. I also applied for a $10 million loan for White Earth and Shooting Star Casino, and it has been denied. A couple of reasons. We're over 500 employees, and one of the other things in the rules so far is if you have gaming revenue that is 50% or more of your revenue, you are not eligible. So we weren't eligible because of both of those cases. So our loan for White Earth, RBC, Shooting Star was denied. The new information that Barb is getting that in the next round that is being talked about, whether it comes out or not, is to include governmental agencies in the next round, which she believes is going to include tribal governments as well. Maybe she knows more today. You know, I'm not sure how long it'll take. You know, it took a couple weeks between the first round and the second round. I think, you know, the SBA is learning more every time. You know, they're overwhelmed. Their website, you know, as the banks are. Hopefully, there will be another round, and it will include governments, tribal governments, gaming, whatever it is. As it's going along, we're going to be watching it and be prepared to submit loan applications for that as well when that time comes, if we're eligible. You know, I knew when I submitted the application last week that I wasn't eligible, but I was hoping that on Sunday's call or Monday's call, maybe something would be changed. And I knew that if I didn't submit an application, I'd never get approved. If I submitted an application and got a loan and I wasn't eligible, I would visit with Veronica and say, are we eligible? Are we in trouble here for accepting it? And if we would have been in trouble, we wouldn't have accepted it. But we're going to proceed as much as we can, assuming that if there's anything close to eligibility, and then we'll verify if we get the loan, if we are eligible or not. So we're going to be prepared, and we're going to be moving in that direction on PPP loans if they are extended. Any questions on that? So fiscal year 2020 general fund budget. So I put together here a worksheet, and the first column is what our general fund budget originally was. Originally was budgeted, or the first column is actual through April 28th. We're at 4.8 million in revenue, and we're at 8.5 million of expenditures. So our deficit is 3.7 million. Out of that 4.8 of revenue, about 2.5 million is probably transfers. 2.5 million is probably transfers from the casino. Their bond payments for us, and an actual $2 million cash transfer. So our original budget is column 2, 17.9 million in revenue, 21.8 million in expenditures, for a 3.9 deficit is where we're sitting at for the budget. We have visited with the casino, and worst case scenario is they cannot afford to give us any more money this year other than the bond payments. Worst case scenario. So with that in mind, they'll probably pay, they've transferred us 2 of cash, probably about 2 in fees and bond payments. I considered about $4 million transfer from the casino instead of 9. So a 5 million potential deficit from the casino. I also estimated maybe sales tax are gonna be reduced because everything is closed. $1 million reduction, gas tax is gonna be down, convenience, convenience stores will be up, but hotels will be down. Maybe $1 million reduction in sales tax. So we could have a $6 million reduction in revenue in the general fund. So that drops us from 18 million to 12 million. And we're budgeted for $22 million of expenses. We could be $10 million deficit. $10 million deficit. So we can put in a bunch of reductions in expenses here. And these are only for consideration. I am not telling you to close these or not do these or anything of that nature. I am saying we should consider these things. And like on the top of the list is Boys and Girls Club. They're currently closed. They may be closed for the remainder of the year. They may open sometime later. I don't know. If they are closed the remainder of the year, we'll probably save $850,000 in the general fund. I also put down things here that maybe we might be okay to pay from COVID grants that we need to check and see, could these things be reimbursed and paid by grants, BIA, supplemental funding, things of that nature. What are the things I put on here? Public safety, 1.6 million. Tribal college, 450,000 reduction. Fleet, they're budgeted to lose $200,000 this year. They're at $100,000 loss already. Could be $90,000 savings. Water system construction, a lot of times, we budgeted quite a couple $100,000 loss. That's 90,000. Transit, maybe we're going to have a reduction. We had original budget at an $850,000 general fund budget to transit. They just got a $511,000 grant. I think they got another grant. So I'm hoping that that's going to go down anywhere from 500 to the 850 that we put in.
I think that maybe you could probably just give us the number, because I think that you're gonna probably put our people into a panic, I think, if you.
Okay,
if you took
so the
there.
things that I identified that we need to look at to see if they can be funded in other ways is 5.9 million. So I estimate we're going to be 6 million under in revenue. 5.9 we might be able to redirect expending. So instead of being a $10 million loss in the general fund, possibly it might be only 4 million. $4 million loss in the general fund instead of 10 million.
But some of these expenditures that I'm looking at here can be covered by COVID, and also some of the aid to travel government, and also hopefully we'll get a check from the treasury soon to offset some of this too. So
and that's my goal, is that we still are able to spend these, but with different dollars.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, we could have a $4 million budget deficit. If we had a $4 million budget deficit on 9/30, we would have to get funds. Our cash bank would be negative. We would probably have to borrow money, because on September 30th, we have to have positive cash bank in the general fund. And if we lose $4 million in the remainder of the year, our cash bank will be negative. So we would have to borrow money, we'd have to get money somewhere else, we have to get more grants, and these things are possible. If I would have got a $10 million PPP loan, this would be a whole different story. And we might still get one of those if they come through. So I just want to let you know early, we're 6 months away from the end of the year, so that it's not 30 days from the end of the year, and what are we going to do?
So what I'm thinking, like I was telling you earlier on the calendar there, is we're supposed to be meeting here next week or the week after, planning out the remainder of the fiscal year. And we'll start to deconflict with some of these issues here. And then taking another look at the next fiscal year, if we're only projected at 20% EBITDA from revenue streams, etc. And so that means, as I stated in my report last Friday, that revenue projections have a direct effect on our operational planning. So thank you for the report, Scott.
With that in mind, if those estimates are right, in fiscal year 2021, we won't get 9 million from shooting star next year either. We might get 4, 5 million, half of it. So again, our budget for revenue next year might be $12 million, just like we're projecting for the end of this year. If our revenue projected for next year is 12 million, and this year we budgeted 22 million in expenditures, we're gonna have to cut 50% from the general fund budget. And we're fast approaching the time that we normally do our budget, but yet so many of these things are up in the air. When does the casino open? How fast does Vistas come back? We've never went through this before, so we can't say history will repeat itself and that we know this is how it's gonna work. We've never been here before.
Well, the other thing to this is that when you look at, as far as staffing goes, we know that it's 10 months, we've stated this from the beginning. Was it unemployment lasts 10 months, okay? So we've stated that we have Tom and Brian and these other guys that are looking at other enterprise opportunities for us to recover. We've consistently stated that it's gonna take us anywhere from 18 months to 36 months to fully recover from this pandemic. People are saying the economy has crashed, or it's gonna crash nationally. I've told people that it's already crashed here. Gaming is gonna take a while to recover, right? And that's why we've got the continuity of government work group, organizational work group that's taking an active look at restoration or restructure. And so that's the recommendations that we're gonna have to bring back to the tribal council and propose to them. So, yeah. But I think there could be a lot of opportunity there with those other enterprise activities, especially small business. And instead of the tribe-owned and everything, and taking, we can support our band members and starting their own businesses. And so a lot of these jobs that could be lost because of this pandemic, we can support smaller businesses in the area and help those people get jobs elsewhere. To me, that is reasonable and it's appropriate.
You know, when I look at this is what's happened to all of our fellow reservations around us too, you know, and kind of like, we kind of looked at it since, I don't know, the early 2000s to 2010s is that a lot of us tried to put a lot of our eggs in the basket when it comes to gaming. That's our only revenue source, you know, and these are things that we as a nation and as a council, we need to start looking at other areas where we're going to start generating more money, economic development. And like what Alan said is like I've been trying to push the whole along with our healthcare systems, and you know, I think that we have to look and we have to start planning more down the road. Is we can't be in this predicament again of another pandemic that comes through and wipes out our, you know, so we got to find alternative A and B and C that's gonna be there for us. So I mean, it's important that we start planning for the next go around, I guess, and that's the reason why I keep talking about vital health systems again. But I mean, that's something that I've always been talking about. So
well, we have to be very mindful too, Mr. Chair, and I say that because the report that Ronnie just gave, she said that direct billing with IHS is in jeopardy now based upon the actions of a handful of individuals from, you know, from 5-6 years ago. And so if it's been determined that, you know, if we get our hands slapped, we may not even be able to pursue some of these projects because of the violations that have occurred in the past. And the other thing to this is we have to be careful with the state of Minnesota. Now, I know the governor has stated that he wants to make sure we get this 17 million back, right? Or not 17, but our $15 million take back, right? And however, that hasn't been included, it has not been included in the legislative package yet. And we need to get after the governor to make sure that it actually gets in there. Because that's another 15 to 17 million off the top of that 42 that we got saved up. And they're going to be asking for that money come August if they haven't passed any legislation. So we're staring down the barrel of, on top of all of this, we're staring down the barrel of possible federal violation that affects our capacity to direct bill IHS and $15 million from the state. And now they tell us one thing, but actually putting it in legislation is another. We've got a lot of we're juggling a lot of issues at the same time. But I'm cautiously optimistic. I think we got the right team, the right people working on this, and I think we'll get through it. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I do agree with you, Mr. Chair, that we need to get our health system better equipped and better prepared. And maybe now is the time to do that.
Thank you, sir.
So next one is the Nadawash E&P remodel. I have seen a preliminary estimate of probably $100,000 to do that reconstruction, construction. I don't know how much the equipment is going to be, if it's $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. And now I've heard that there's some additional maybe work on that building. You know, so that could be a $100,000 to $150,000 to $200,000 project. I don't know what it is yet. And my question is if we are projecting maybe a $4 million loss, is this a time to do it? And that's a decision for you at the council table to decide.
I thought we were.
Maybe you have, I don't know.
Well, we've passed a motion in early March, as you recall, to suspend all major financial activity projects. And so, and we're reviewing it right now. So I think maybe when we meet next week and that, we can re-pull up that capital improvement plan. And I think that was the E&P remodel was part of that. So we just take a look at everything that's sitting there and see where it fits. You know, I think that's prudent. I think that's reasonable. Some of these projects we have to go through with, right, because they've already been planned and funded.
Yes.
But others, you know, we may not be able to pursue. And if we pursue some of these capital projects, we'll really be putting ourselves in a pickle.
Right.
Like, I mean, you want to save jobs. You want to make sure people are working. It's nice
You put
it's nice to have.
the kitchen,
It's nice to have a nice.
that's gonna be updated,
but we wanna
that's
make
been
sure
about
that
3-4 years,
Yeah.
I've been waiting.
Yeah, we're talking about trying to meet on that next week, Kathy.
All right,
Yeah.
when and where?
Oh, Scott's supposed to set it up.
Okay,
Okay, so one additional thing that's not on the list under me is, White Earth Office Supply sent a request to the casino yesterday that they wanted to buy $4,000 of masks from a company in China. And they wanted us to wire the money to China. And Steve Drews and Scott Stevens and I said,
No.
absolutely not. We're not. Have you ever used this vendor before? No. We're not wiring money to anywhere. We said,
Especially China of all places.
we said, get them, we'll fill out a credit application, place the order. When they deliver product, we will then pay for it like normal. And that was the message sent back to the manager at Office Supply. And then the request from the manager today was, I want my debit card limit increased to $5,000.
No.
And it would, assumption tells me that it appears that maybe they want to order it with a debit card. Well, a debit card is just as bad as a wire. If I do it on a credit card, I can reverse a transaction possibly if it's a scam. But if I give you my debit card, it's just like an ACH. And then the comment was, I'm going to talk to the tribal council because you guys aren't doing this for me, from the manager. So I don't know if you guys have heard about this yet or not, but they want the debit card increased. And I haven't asked the question, is it because you're going to order this $4,000 from China, or is it some other reason?
Well, if we're gonna be buying from anywhere, we should be buying from a US company.
Yes.
What happened to procurement shop? Or is it under
Well,
5,000, I suppose? Huh?
But the issue is, there's no manager or supervisor overall at enterprises.
So they're hiring for that.
And we do a little bit of work here, and Shooting Star does a little bit of work here. And
No,
they kind of run independently and.
no, that's not true. Actually, Shooting Star is overseeing White Earth Enterprises.
True.
They are overseeing them. And then we were gonna do that until that director was hired, and at that time, we reassessed where they should fall under. That was the last we had of it. they posted the position again because we wanted to get, some more applications. We only got one application. So we were gonna try and generate some more.
So I
That's
can,
where it's at.
I-
So yes, they report, I know I saw the email where she's questioning, who do we report to? Shelley Thompson said, it's them, it is them.
okay, so I'm the only one that has the authorization to increase this debit card limit. People at Shooting Star don't have that authorization.
This is that now.
Yeah, well, look.
What is
We
it
got a
right now?
procurement policy, we should just.
Debit
follow
card.
it, Yeah.
So I'm not increasing the limit, we're not buying from a company.
No,
No, we're not buying from China.
No, I agree with that, but I want to know what the debit card is right now.
what is her,
What do they have?
what is her
Well,
level now?
I am not sure the exact limit now. It's less than $4,000. But they have in the past typically used it, I don't know if it's because they couldn't get purchasing fast enough, but they would use the debit card to basically purchase things and then they'd send them through with the POs and things of that nature. I'm not sure the real reason, but it was used quite frequently and it was used appropriately, has been in the past.
I do want to say this, though. I want to make sure that we want to get PPE for our people. We need it, right? We need to take care of our people. We want to get PPE. But a wire transfer to China, something doesn't seem right there, right? So perhaps we can look at other sources and other vendors to get that PPE. We want to get PPE for our people, right, Kathy? We need protective equipment for our people, you know?
I actually just read an article that, what big company just ordered a bunch of, masks from China
Yeah.
and they are not using them because, so they could make them sick or something. There was something wrong with those masks.
Yeah.
So,
But we want to get protective equipment for our employees and elders, right, Kath?
Yep.
So we're gonna try to get that stuff ordered, and I know we got a stockpile of stuff at the casino there, and with community councils, we've been working on getting PPE pushed out to elders as well. All that stuff's happening, but we want to make sure we get more of that stuff brought in, because this thing is supposed to peak in June. So, we'll take another look at, other vendors to try to get that PPE brought in. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, let's follow up on IHS, and I think they should be giving us knowledge too. Or have Butler.
Or maybe they can tell us where they're getting them from if we don't use that source.
Yeah. I'll put Pat on that. All right, good.
Thank you.
All right, the next thing for the break is Kathleen Warren, 2020 task.
I'm here. Are you able to hear me?
yes.
I hear you.
Okay.
Weren't these budgeted,
What's that?
these taxes?
I think we did, yeah. The only thing she had wanted to do was buy land, and I don't think we budgeted to purchase land.
Correct.
So Catherine, I guess, so, you being on the call is, you just want us to pass a resolution to pay these taxes?
Yeah, we were just bringing them forward like we did last year to recognize the expenses and what funds they're coming out of. And that's what we're doing this year. We already had it budgeted in the WAPA account, and we do have a little extra left over for anything that we flowed in that didn't come in time. Just recognizing all the expenditures in the fund code.
Yeah, and a big one on here is that Bagley Casino, like the taxes on that. And I think we were talking that the taxes might actually go up on that depending on the county, yeah? Kath?
What I noticed this year is a lot of them went down just a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know what the projections are for 2021, but that's being covered by the casino right now, and hopefully by next year we'll have it in trust. It's kind of right towards the end of that process, so hopefully it'll get in there in time and it'll be off tax rolls then.
And just for the folks watching at home, these are fee simple lands that the tribe has acquired throughout the years. These are lands that are not in trust status. And so White Earth over many years has tried to acquire more land to help restore our land base on the reservation. And a lot of these lands, we do have packets in to try to get them put into trust status. Is that correct, Kathy?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're working on trying to get them into trust status. Yeah. Yeah, it's just we've had a lot of issues at BIA, right?
Yeah, it's a slow process. We're getting many of them moved through this manner, but it's a process. And then we've got, still some title work that we've got to clean up on some, and we're trying to do them in batches so we don't overwhelm, because it just takes a long time.
Can we use our behavioral health? We need to pay taxes.
We'll check with the attorney. I don't know if we can or not.
I don't know.
You don't quite say no, but
yeah.
it
Maybe,
doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
We do have behavioral health paying taxes on properties that they're
yeah,
using to help
maybe their
offset. So
taxes.
If they're used for those purposes.
Yeah.
Which it looks like it is.
But Liz, this is already budgeted out? These
I
taxes?
think we did budget for
I
taxes.
think so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we
So
did.
do we still want to do
Yeah.
a motion, or are we good?
You guys have a motion.
We have to have them, we got a resolution.
All right, can I get a motion to pay the taxes on our non-trust status land that's held in fee to the counties of the amount of
Motion,
300,000.
Yeah.
334,000. Motion by Kathy. Second. Second by Ray. All in favor?
Yeah, yeah.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And we'll figure it out. Just have to have-
Yeah, I can follow up with Vaughn and at least see if we can do the behavioral health ones.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go on break. You good?
before we go on break, can I ask Kathy? Kathy, you still there?
yeah. Hi.
How's it coming on that house? That's been boarded up for years. Did you talk to the lawyer?
I'll have to touch base with Shanda on that, because I told her we need to get those 5 that are in that condition around the reservation through. I'll have to see what she has to say. Unless you guys as a council can decide on that one, that might make a decision quicker too.
Did a long time ago.
Huh?
It's, he's not enrolled,
Yeah.
tribal land.
Yeah, the, Peter Schreck guy, he was an enrolled member. His son, I believe has some, I want to say some challenges. I think he needs some assistance for decision making. And
Yeah.
he's not in White Earth, so he can't have a home site.
He's been here for 2 years.
Yeah, and so we either gotta somehow get him to get the structure off